Hello. So my camera cut short last time, so I'm gonna do part 2 of the domestic violence video. I was kind of talking about the challenges, and then I was gonna talk about more the ways that my life is effective integrating that experience, because I think it's not as simple as like, oh, that was really difficult and that's it. Obviously it was. I don't want to romanticize these experiences, and I don't think they're great, but for me a big part of like difficult or negative, this is negative experiences, they teach you a lot, and I think it's an integral part of life, and I think it's made me who I am today. So there is something that's come from that experience that has informed me in a way that is important, and that's what I'm going to share with you. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a bit about describe what happened a bit more, and keeping things as like broad as possible. Again, it's not really about the reason why I'm doing this is for myself and for other people. Okay, so in part 1, I was talking about some of the challenges of growing up with domestic violence, and how I was kind of identifying like how that affects your self-esteem and like sense of self-worth and love. So that is a central challenge in my life, it feels like, because it's that is a core of you having a healthy life and you having healthy relationships and you having the kind of life that you want. That is kind of my mission for my 30s, is to center myself and to develop a really strong sense of self-love. And I'm thinking of documenting that experience on YouTube as well, so you can see how I've managed to do that and how I've managed to like aim for that and try to cultivate that through a period. So obviously there's a big impact on your mental health if you grow up in conflict, or if you grow up in a psychological type war zone whereby your home doesn't feel safe. And some of the challenges that come up for people is that they have quite a big feeling of hypervigilance, which is where you scan your environments for danger. And as an autistic person, I already have that anyway, so it's kind of twofold for me. Being autistic and growing up in that situation is kind of a double whammy in terms of the intensity of my experiences, and I would say of the repercussions as well. I think some of those issues are important, and something that I found quite challenging. Hold on a second, I think there's some mascara on my glasses. Having long lashes. I sound arrogant, but I'm gonna be arrogant. Do you know why? Because I'm practicing self-love. And why can't I be complimentary? Question. That's one thing I'm gonna think about and kind of challenge people about as well, is like, we're so down on people for being like arrogant or complimenting themselves or having, I get it, maybe if someone's being like really insincere, but like that's not great. But I think people should be allowed to compliment themselves. I just feel like there should be some space for us to be like, I rock, I'm really great, that's fab. Anyway, coming back to what I was saying, it feels like I've needed quite a lot of mental health support, and I have had that, and I'll talk about some of the kind of positives from that in the next section. And I think one of my struggles is some of the adults, when I would stick up for myself as a child, they would call me abusive, and so that's quite a common tactic, and it really like messes your head up, because you're like, am I? And then you're like, what's going on? I don't really know what's going on. And so, I think additionally, a lot of the times for a few complex reasons, including, I think the gender that I am, means that people often demonize me and see me as like a liar and all this kind of feminized stuff, especially if I'm like an upset little girl. Like, people don't treat those, like, people treat girls like they're lying quite a lot, like they're mischievous, and it's all very sexist kind of problematic stuff. And that I was autistic and I wasn't believed meant that people thought I was, but that's a mixture of like their fault and also like society's fault, and obviously it wasn't really great for me. But also being in that environment additionally means that that I had quite a lot of emotionally destructive things that I had to deal with, because one of the things that it made me really determined about in my life was like, I'm not going to live like this, and I'm not going to have these kind of relationships. I'm not going to have toxic, abusive relationships. That's why I decided. I've alluded to before how that didn't really work out initially, and I ended up in some. But as I've grown older, I've kind of learned much more, and it just made that belief very strong that I have to understand why that happened. What can I do to make sure that doesn't happen? What things can I put in place to make sure that my relationships are healthy, that I'm communicating effectively, and that I'm handling my repercussions from this upbringing as well as possible. So like I have quite bad like anger problems, and trying to use that energy effectively is really important, because I've learned how to manage my intense emotions much better through techniques like DBT, and I think that's been amazing, and that's something that I've had a lot of experience in because I've had such a challenging time. So there's an interesting and kind of difficult paradox whereby the more messed up someone is, often, not always, but they get attended to by different services and they get some kind of support. Whereas if people aren't as expressive with how messed up they are, or it's not so kind of stereotypically difficult, if someone doesn't like come to terms with the fact that they grew up in a domestically violent family, they might just be like, yeah, this is normal, it's not a problem. They might never get any support, whereas I've had support since I was 9 years old. Because the adults in my family were fighting all night, I came to school without any sleep, and the teachers picked that up and they were like, what's wrong? And I told them, and so they sent me to the counsellors. Interestingly, I think I come from quite a privileged, economically privileged family, especially at that time. And I think if we had been less economically privileged, or if we'd been in a state school, I was international and I was in a private international school, which is not the same as private English schools, it's a very different culture. But I think, maybe the social services would have been involved, but because we weren't in that situation, I don't think they were. And I feel like that would have been more helpful for me if they had been involved, or the police. Anyway, it's like, ironically, when you have had a really tough ride and you are quite expressive about that, or you're expressive about those difficulties in whatever way, I think you might get support, and people that don't really do that but might need that support don't really get that. So it's a bit of a paradox where I've been very privileged because I've been so messed up that like I've had a lot of support, so I know a lot about it, and yet people who are on the sideline of that or don't get that, don't get that support. So I think one of the main things that has come up for me in terms of the challenges of this experience is that I've alluded to before that because I was, a girl, and because I was, socialized as a girl, socialized as someone who is the youngest, but also I was autistic but no one knew it. It was kind of like I was kind of a trash bag for people's problems. So I just feel like I got the worst side of people's behavior, because even when I was upset by it or sticking up for myself, I was kind of demonized quite heavily. And that's been a real big theme in my life. And I think a lot of people's lives, if they're women or socialized as women, or, if they're disabled, that happens a lot for disabled people, autistic people. It's like you're kind of making up your problems. You're not really being genuine. You're making a big deal about nothing, you're just oversensitive and all this stuff. And I know a lot about these things because of this upbringing. I've gone into learning about how to stop this kind of stuff from happening. So that's why I have a master's degree in gender policy and inequality. And that's why I did those things. So I think I will come on to that again in the positive section. But I think that it's really difficult to contend with that you have kind of been demonized so heavily that it kind of even goes into the further extended family, where people just think you're a bad, person when you're like, hold on a minute. So I've been in this really difficult situation, but I'm trying to make it better, but it's like other people attacking me and I'm like a little kid. So it's just that's very difficult to contend with. A part of me, as I grow older, I'm learning these techniques about not being affected by other people's views, which is difficult because, again, if you're socialized as a woman, you're taught to only really care about what other people think of you. That's kind of a big part of what that is, that gender role. So yeah. So yeah, I guess another challenge is it is knowing or really wanting that recovery, not just for yourself but for everyone else. I think there's a lot of sadness and grief and yearning for the kind of family that is healthy, and this feels like there's a lot of needless pain that is kind of continuing, whereas I feel like if someone would just listen to me about something, then I think, or at least, I don't know, I just don't want people to be suffering about it anymore. And I feel like I can, I don't know, it's really difficult to just want this to be better, but it kind of never is. And it feels like Chiron, which is this myth of someone who's wounded and is permanently wounded and can't get the wound to heal. And it feels like that. I do think there's hope, but I think, I've done everything I can by this point and I can't do anything else. I just don't have, for someone who's one of the most marginalized people in the family, I am also the one that's doing all the heavy lifting and have done for years and years and years and years. I just can't keep doing that. Why should I? There's a lot of other more privileged people. They haven't done any of the heavy lifting and haven't bothered and continue to demonize and treat other people badly and, would treat me badly if I was still in their life / have treated me really badly. So it's a bit what? Why would it's not in my interest. I need to live a life. I need to live a life that is enjoyable. It's absolutely fundamental. I cannot continue with this shit, basically, nor should I. I'm already 30 years old, and I would say half, maybe even over half of my life's energy has been spent on this shit. So yeah, I think that's also really exciting that I'm building a life that's worth living and building a life that's going to be and is more and more enjoyable and fun. So yeah, so I think that's been really difficult, is there's been an implicit expectation of me doing all the heavy lifting, and still no one / not many people have responded very well. There is one example of someone who has responded well, and we have a really, really great relationship now. So there is some good news. Another challenge is the frustrations of trying to make it better but that's not really working. I think I've tried a lot of different techniques, and that's been something that I've always had. Even when I was a kid, I would try lots of different techniques to try to stop the arguments and the fighting, and I would write it down in my diary about what techniques would work and what techniques wouldn't work. So sometimes I would totally ignore what happened. Sometimes I would go in guns blazing and be defending one person or the other person. And other times I would be being the counsellor, and that's what we were kind of made to be a lot of the time, and so on and so forth. So I think I've tried a lot to address and to make things better, and I've tried those different techniques. And I think one of the challenges is that it takes two people to make a relationship good. It takes two people to really put that time, energy and effort in, and that hasn't happened. So it's because of all these things, I'm still expected to do the most labour, and yet no one else is. And so, yeah, it's very hard to have a dynamic whereby you're trying to do all this stuff to make things better, but it doesn't work, and people don't really, they don't take part, they don't make any effort, they don't do anything, and then simultaneously they demonize you at the same time. I think one of the struggles with a lot of people's relationships is that people don't know how to be accountable for their actions, and they would rather there's these 5 responses to accountability, which is blame, gaslight, defend, and excuse. I think there's another one. So essentially, people don't respond very well when you try to address things, even though it's a great opportunity, even though that person is putting that energy into raising these things so that the relationship improves. So it's in their interest, it's in everyone's interest. But when I have tried to address things simply by, even just when I have said, hey, this behavior is not okay for me anymore, please can you do something else? This is what I need for my relationships to be healthy and for my life to be livable. When people, hear that, to me, I'm just like, oh, that's very reasonable, that's very logical, that's understandable. But I have been basically hunted and harassed and just seriously badly treated for trying to do that, which is very typical of abusive families, to be so used to crossing your boundaries, be so used to being abusive, that when you try to stop that, then the reaction is more abuse, the reaction is more violence. And that's a way to keep the power structures, and that's a way to continue on what's been happening. So, everyone's quite familiar with the idea that the one that sticks up for themselves, or one that tries to do something about it, is the one that is fucked and gets fucked over. And that's certainly been my experience, not just in my family, but maybe in every corner of my life. And so check out my workplace bullying video, check out my any video. No, I'm kidding, but I'm just having a laugh. It is funny because I find this stuff quite funny, and maybe that's, people don't understand that, maybe that's, I've realised recently I have quite dark humour, but go me, fucking hell, I'm smashing life, I'm smashing this life up into little pieces. I'm kidding. Honestly, I'm not physically violent, just so we're all clear, despite my upbringing. And I think I alluded to this earlier as well, the difficulty of not really being able to talk about your upbringing. You're not really, Christmas is really difficult for me. I spent quite a lot of Christmases with friends, and this whole, so many people family is the best, and family is the most important thing, and blood is the most important thing, and that really hurts me every time I hear that, because I'm that's just not how it is for me, and that's a really difficult part of my life, and I want it to be so much, but my story doesn't fit this, to be honest, quite bullshit archetype of what a family is, which is very toxic and wrong in many ways, and it's mainly been built for capitalism, and it's a construct that governments and religious institutions, some of them, benefit from. The same with heteronormativity, and so that's women and opposite sex attraction, so called, so men and women fancying each other, heterosexual norms in society, and which leads on to increased homophobia. Those kind of family structures and nuclear family structures are created and are emphasized, especially in capitalist, colonial, Eurocentric culture, and that's been spread out and globalized. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that all that's pretty effed up and toxic, and is not really working for a lot of people. So I know all that, and because it's the norm, and because it's the culture, and people kind of expect me for things to be fixed at some point, and for things to be okay. And so whenever people ask me about my family, and they do, and some people ask me regularly, it's always a bit yeah, it's not great. And do you want me to talk about it, because it's kind of dark, but maybe I don't know, I'm going to summarise this in a great way, So I think that those things are quite difficult. I'm probably going to ask some people, just don't worry about asking about it. I will probably let you know if something good happens. So now I'm going to go to the positives, or some of the things that I've learned from having this upbringing. Obviously, I know quite a lot about my mental health now and well-being and managing those things, and that really wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have had the upbringing I had, and if I hadn't taken the steps to address my needs, and also to try to be really determined to not turn into someone who behaves like that and mistreats the people I love. Sorry, there's one more downside. Sorry, I keep being like, blah, 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 there's so many challenges. I mean, it's serious. Another challenge is that I have something whereby, I think it's called like, I don't know. I have something where I'm really petrified of having kids. I don't like the idea of the biological thing for me. I don't like the idea of giving birth. I don't like the idea of raising kids. I mean, I do like the idea in some respects, but I am like petrified of hurting them in any way, and I'm also petrified of being like in any way, shape or form an abusive parent, and it just really like twists my mind to the point where like there is a part of me that wants kids, but there's also a huge part of me that really doesn't want kids, and that's fine. There's loads of people that shouldn't have kids, there's loads of people that would be better off if they didn't have kids for themselves, that aren't fit to be parents, that if they just don't want kids, that's absolutely fine. But I think for me, I can't really tell what I want because I've been like kind of messed up about it. And so I can't really distinguish what is the phobia, and like if I deal with that phobia, does that mean I would want kids? And obviously there's sort of a finite time of where I need to sort this out to like decide. I'm like 30, so that's like max, I guess, 10 years, which sounds like a long time, but I'm like, I don't know if that's long enough. But yeah, and it's weird because it's like on some levels I think I would probably be a really effective parent and like good because of that, but I do think I need to deal with that before having a child in my life, because I think there's a way that there can be a balance struck. I think there's a way that you can be an excellent parent because you've had a tough background and you're determined to make it really a nice childhood and an enjoyable childhood for that person. I think that is a real challenge because I just cannot figure that out. And that is very common for a lot of people that have my kind of upbringing. Very understandably, because they're like, well, that wasn't very nice. Sorry. I mean, this is pretty hilarious. I mean, I know it's really dark, but can you see why it's kind of funny? And, that's a great way to deal with it. Welcome to my life. Okay, so where am I? Where am I going? All right, so now let's go into the kind of positives, or the stuff that I'm proud of myself, that I've like managed. Also, isn't this great, this top? Oh my god, look at it. PlayStation is the best. PlayStation is the best. Woo! Although I don't want to get a PlayStation 4 yet because it's expensive. Okay, what am I doing? Right, focus. So some of the positives, or like some of the things that have contributed to my life in a way that I feel is quite effective and wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had this upbringing, is that I really care about I really care about inequality. And the reason that is because I decided very young, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to figure out why this happens. I'm going to figure out what can be done to prevent that from happening. And hence, intersectional theory, and hence like feminist theory, and hence these theories that address inequality. So one of the most important things about those things is that they try to address these problems and they try to solve them for everyone's benefit. People don't really understand that about diversity and equality stuff. It's really good for everyone involved. And I explain why there's such a big reaction to it in my Why Equality Feels Like Oppression video. So one of the things that I found out, and we're going to get a bit heavy on theory here, is that one of the cornerstones of why violence happens is because people see different people as less human than themselves, or they take away people's humanness from them, right? And when we do that, we are more able to be violent towards things and people that we take the humanness out of, because we don't see them as valuable as ourselves. So when you see that equal person, when you see that someone who has equal humanity to you, it's much more difficult, thankfully, to be violent towards them and to abuse them. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I feel so passionate about this field, is that it's kind of the answer to so many of our problems. For example, there are some communities that treat nature as a part of the human family, therefore revaluing it so that nature is essentially the same value as humans. Obviously, that would be much harder to degrade and to extract minerals from and to abuse. Like, we have abused nature. The same for different races. There's so much history that shows the dehumanization processes that colonizing forces and privileged races and white supremacy processes do to take the way from different races. But this is across this dehumanization process is across the board in terms of marginalized groups. And so, disability, trans folks, autistic folks, and that's been a real passion in my life, because when I learn about things like violence against women and gender equality and things like that, the important, it's all very important, and the reason why sexism is so bad and ableism is so bad and racism is so bad is that it extracts, for obvious reasons, it's bad, and it extracts the humanness out of people's experiences and further provokes violence against those peoples and those groups. And so you can see why people might get so passionate about those areas. Simultaneously, I don't want us to, I feel like these things are very endemic and very omnipresent and very normal in our lives. So I don't think we should, it's hard to express, but we need to normalize the concepts in the respect of they are everywhere, they are endemic. Everyone can be those things and has been those things, in my view, including myself. So we have to, at the same time as recognizing how damaging it is and how terrible it is and awful it is, we have to also recognize that it is normal, very sadly, in society. That has been a real positive, my experiences means that I believe passionately in these areas. And that's why you get a lot of people who are interested in diversity and marginalization and these theories and concepts, also partaking in the activism and who are also marginalized people themselves, because they know what it's like, they know how harmful it is, they know how much it damages society and individuals, and that's why you can get such kind of passion in these fields. And I think that's something that's important, and we should really listen to these people who not only have the experience but have the theory as well. We should just listen to people for their experiences, for what it is, full stop. And at the same time, it's also really important, and I don't think most people understand that there's a whole massive, amazing, interesting fields about these areas. So that really got me involved and got me passionate. It's really amazing to see when we start to deconstruct these things and move away from these really damaging kind of ways of interacting with people, because it's so much better. It's not good for any marriage or any relationship for there to be really strong damaging hierarchies. So it's good for everyone to learn about how to get away from these hierarchies. That naturally improves your relationships with people, to take away those hierarchies, because one of the struggles in relationships is power dynamics, is abuse and oppression, and so on and so forth. So we have the blueprints here to make not only our relationships better but other people. There's and even the communities, and there's a lot of things that can come out of these things for the better. Yeah, which is also why it's a shame why it's such a kind of underappreciated field and also demonized field, and it's a field that's really attacked. But it's attacked because it's so powerful and it's so impactful and it challenges the power dynamics. So people that are invested in those power dynamics are going to respond to that. A bit like my family example where I stick up for myself and I experience more violence, It's unfortunately, that's one of the parts of accountability and a part of challenging, damaging power structures. And you can see that throughout history and throughout your own life, I'm sure. It's hard to describe, but when you have been someone that has had severe mental health struggles, I've experienced psychosis before, I've experienced, obviously like quite severe meltdowns before. I've gone to like some of the darkest places that you can possibly go in terms of psychology. I think one of the challenges is like battling with suicidal ideation, which is very common for people who have had my upbringing. And that's just been something that I've always, and it sounds like I always will have to battle with. It's kind of a question of like trying to get that more and more silent in my mind. Thankfully, it's often passive suicidal ideation, which means that it's not like active. So it's not like, it's more like someone's harassing me about it rather than me, planning anything, which is, I'm very grateful because I think that would be even more challenging to handle. But it's still not very nice. Still not something that I'm like, this is fun, So yeah. And I think one of the benefits of being someone who is versed in mental landscapes and kind of walking through and navigating such difficult terrain is that you can help other people. Yes, I'm not a therapist. Yes, I don't recommend me as a therapist, or it's kind of like a first point of contact for people that are struggling. And one of the things that I've done in my studies of mental health is it seems like one of the things that makes it worse is when people treat you like it's strange and it's that you're crazy and like it's terrible and you're a danger to everyone and it's just really weird. And I would say that is kind of normal in our society, to be honest. Whereas mental health struggles are reasonable reactions to unreasonable circumstances. So I'm going to talk about psychosis more. So people get into a state of psychosis often because they've had really, really, really difficult life experiences. That means that their brain is overloaded and can't cope with all of this stuff, and hence we get a psychotic episode. Now, I know a lot about, I'm also very interested in like decolonizing mental health, so I have a lot of views that aren't kind of standard Western perspectives. Lots of credit given to the Dagara tribe in West Africa, who have a very different approach to psychosis, where they see it as a very, very difficult, like not to romanticize it at all, but a part of some people's journey. And I would recommend you read stuff by Malidoma Somé. I think that there are some privileges to be able to interact with people who are in a dark space in ways that helps them, and that's been my experience. Again, I would obviously recommend therapeutic support, but not everyone can get that, and there is a lot of lots of people rely on their friends to help them out for things, and I am not as frightened or as scared of those spaces as some other people might be, especially people who haven't been in them or haven't had training. I've had training on how to support people with psychotic episodes, and I have done that in effective ways. So I think, again, I'm not saying, bam, like I'm the therapy person or I'm the main person that everyone should come to about all their problems. No, but I do feel lucky to know how to support people, at least initially, with these very difficult, dark places in ways that seem to be very effective. And I think one of the main reasons that is because of my more normalizing approach, where if someone comes to me and they talk about stuff that in the mainstream is very out there, is very kind of dark and so on and so forth, I can respond it in ways that acknowledges that is concerning and acknowledges that that is also a reasonable response to their experiences. And that often decreases that normalization process rather than, oh, that's really weird, and like demonizing process, and that's very like, you know, you need to be locked away kind of approach. That actually often, not always, but often makes those things worse. It obviously depends on the severity, like if they're in danger, all these things. But what I'm trying to express is that one of the main tenets of mental health first aid is listening to people. When you listen to people, often their mental health struggles decrease. And when you normalize those approaches, when you support that space in a way that doesn't kind of pathologize them, that often decreases the distressing parts of that mental health struggle as well. So that has been a real privilege. I have felt very privileged to be able to go on this journey and support people, and I've been supported by people in the same vein. And I think this is quite normal in the autistic community as well. Like a lot of us do support each other, including with like quite difficult stuff. And, you know, this is quite normal, especially when actually the mental health services and the doctors and the, you know, the health services are actually all, it's a fucking shit show, to be fair. I mean, you know, there's lots of positives and it's understandable, and it's because of the privatization of the NHS, that's the problem. But it doesn't change the fact that a lot of doctors, like, again, demonize and gaslight a lot of my community. So yeah, and I've experienced quite a lot of that as well. So it's very like needed, basically, that kind of expertise and experience within peer support as well as outside of it. So yeah, I have done co-counselling training, which is like peer support, mental health first aid training. I've done lots of trainings on mental health, as in received lots. And then I also worked with Mind as a Mind Kit volunteer. So it's like providing people with the 5 tools of well-being, which is about like noticing the present moment and kind of using tools to manage like day-to-day mental health work. And then obviously I've got a lot of experience of like theory. I've done a lot of like work around neurodivergence and theory and how that intersects with diversity and kind of anti-oppressive work and stuff like that. So yeah, and then I've got my own experience, which is always, you know, survivor experience is incredibly important. We don't listen to survivors enough. Again, we kind of like, oh, they're crazy, blah, 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 blah. Like that's the mainstream, that's kind of the medical approach. But the more and more we're looking into these things, the more we're seeing that that's not true. And like, we know what we're talking about. And there's a lot of history of people who are marginalized, who are deemed crazy and are ignored. And that is a purposeful, in terms of the systemic oppressive structure, application of that. So like the whole idea of like women being hysterical is another way to silence those people and to ignore their needs. And that's the same for many other groups, as I've already talked about. I think, you know, that's why we have to be very careful about how we use the term crazy. It's more about like who around them has caused them harm. So I think you need to be suspicious of other people calling someone else crazy. I remember I've experienced like a lot of people who have treated me really badly and then have framed me as crazy. And I think you have to look out for that, because they've used that to kind of excuse their harm on me. The cheeky people, the silly jam donuts, trying to like swear without being like really, yeah. Apparently lots of swear words are very based on ableist stuff. Like we know about like lame being really offensive, and there's stupid, which is how people call people with mental health struggles. Obviously there's crazy, and there's idiot, moron. Moron was like my favorite, and now I'm like, oh, that's like, that was used against people that were like crazy. But well, there you go. Doing it myself. The thing is, I'm not annihilating crazy from my vocabulary, because I'm saying like, I sometimes talk about crazy in like a good way, and then I talk about it being crazy in a bad way, because I think there is good crazy. Like I'm good crazy, I feel, you know, and I have mad pride. So it's kind of that thing. It's like, I'm proud to be mad, because mad is a concept which is not straightforward, and there's a lot of, I've kind of explained why I might be proud of that. So another kind of aspect that I wouldn't change my background for is that it has taught me how to create my own family and to really appreciate like really good family connections, and
to really celebrate the ones I have, because through my work I have created really healthy relationships with some people in my blood family, and that's been really amazing. And seeing that transformation and seeing that work pay off has been just awesome. And it's just got us into a place where this person has been accountable, has been really reflective, has kind of realized everything that I've been saying all this time. You know, they're very explicitly like, you're demonized in the family, you're made to be the problem, you're like, you've been blamed for all the problems that we've had, and we've, you know, they've acknowledged all these things and they believe these things and now they see these things. Yeah, and that's really, you know, affirming. And finally, you know, after at least like 5 years of doing this work, that has happened. And so that's been really great, and so I'm really so pleased and happy about that, because it's great and I never thought that would happen. And also it's someone that has, like, you know, experienced a lot of struggles and also is the more demonized person in the family as well. So I think there's a lot of crossovers there. And yeah, you know, I'm not saying I'm pleased with everything, you know, but we're not really saying that. We're saying that there is space for growth, and I'm not pleased with everything in the past. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is some space for people to be accountable and to change and for things to get better. And that's really, you know, hope-filled to see, and that's amazing to experience. And that's what I mean. That's why I'm so frustrated that's not happening anywhere else. But you know what? Like, I've invited people into my life, you know, and I've invited them to do it on this healthy basis. If they're not prepared to do that, that's their loss. And I have to move on, and I can't keep going in these circles. But I'm really happy that there has been some really healthy relationships emerge from this, and precisely because of my and their work on these areas. So that's been really good. And it's been really good to like build friendships that are like my family, and also to have really good connections with James's, my partner's family, whereby I can really kind of sense what a healthy family dynamic and what a joyous family experience would be like, because I really missed out on that. So that's been really awesome. I love it so much. And it's hard for me to not get emotional when I have really good family experiences with, like, in those contexts. Yeah, because I'm like, this is so great. And I think I just really value those things in a way that maybe wouldn't be the same if I didn't have a tough time. All right. Okay, we're back. So I had a bit of a problem with my camera again. Also, good news. I have a new cup. Well, it's an old cup, but you haven't seen it before. Are you normal? No! Shout it. Shout it. Shout it really loud. It's funny, I was on this call with my partner's family and I showed them this mug, and then I don't know how long afterwards, but I totally forgot, so I did the same thing with the same mug. I was like, look at this mug. And I just totally forgot that I'd done that. But anyway, how interesting. So, where were we? It actually cut me off again, so I don't actually know where I was. So yeah, I was kind of talking about some of the privileges. I don't know. I really don't know how to say this section. I guess it is some of the positives of growing up in a difficult situation. I think I've already explained why it's not, whatever. I mean, I kind of talked about it before, but one of my expertise, one of my areas of interest, one of my areas of obsession is learning how to have healthy relationships. And it's kind of brought me to, this also comes from my inequality work and my work as an autistic person. You know, studying these things and really executing them in my life is really important, and I think it's something that a lot of other people can learn from. Like, I think my ideas on relationships are very unique, and I think that they could be very useful. Well, like, unique. There's a lot of people that are like me, or from my community, or from the queer community, that feel similarly, whereby the ways that we function as in our relationships as a whole can be very, very toxic. Just as a standard, just as normal. And so that's a real privilege to be able to be a part of the work that is going towards making better connections between people. So, for example, relationship anarchy is one aspect that I'm really interested in, which is how to take out hierarchies from your relationships, because hierarchies
contribute to a lot of issues. One way of managing that is talking about power dynamics. If I was I am in an interracial relationship, although my partner passes as white, I think maybe, we do talk about kind of power dynamics and how to navigate those things and how to address those things. So as a man, my partner has gendered privileges that I don't have access to, for example. So having those conversations, I think, can really contribute to an effective and healthy relationship. And with your friends, for example, if you have friends from other races, other genders, other disabilities, or disabilities that you don't share, I think having these kind of conversations can be helpful. This is an illustration of doing things in quite unconventional ways in order to create healthy relationships. So, not everyone wants to talk about power dynamics in your connections, but one can at least kind of offer that if people are interested in that. Maybe there's a class difference, maybe there's a difference with financial income, and so on and so forth. So I think that can really help make sure that everyone's on the same page and make sure that there is that space to talk about, things that might be harmful or things that the more privileged person in that situation can help and address and can put their, extra energy that they might have from having that privilege into something that contributes to your relationship in a healthy way. So yeah, there's a part of me that's just like, oh my god, there's so many lives that can be helped with this kind of tool and these kind of tools in general. Like, just imagine. And what I've found with conflict is that a lot of it is miscommunication, as well as like the power dynamics and the hierarchies that inequalities that make these things worse. A lot of it is like we haven't been taught to, no one has, in my view, has been taught to communicate effectively. So many things can be solved by just effective communication. And there are loads of other tools that can help with this. And there's so many tools out there. There's loads of things that we can use and can help with all these things. That's been a really positive part of my life and has got me to a place where I'm really happy in my relationships with everyone, and I think that's quite a unique place to be. I don't think you can have a healthy relationship without healthy conflict. If there's no conflict in any relationship, that's kind of like there's something that feels like someone's so passive that they're not going to engage with any conflict whatsoever, and I don't think that's good. I think conflict naturally comes up in every relationship, and so the key is to deal with it effectively. And yeah, I feel like I do have some of those tools to be able to do that, which is great. The whole purpose of like effective communication, it can really solve a lot of the problems that exist and that we struggle with as people, and that has been both fascinating and quite frustrating. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about my upbringing. I don't know, I'll just see how it goes basically. It's kind of hard to assess how to talk about it, because again, it's like I'm not doing this to be making it all about the other people and how bad they are as people. I don't think like that. I think it's affected by the fact as well that a lot of people were probably autistic and didn't know it as well, so that must have been really difficult. And I think, again, I'm not excusing it and I don't think it was okay and I'm not at all happy about it, but I just think I've just gotten to a point in my life where I've done enough work and on every part of this that I'm just kind of acceptive. I accept the past and I'm not necessarily like super, it's not about a witch hunt towards any one person, and I think that's just important to emphasize. And I'm still really hopeful about these relationships for the future, and if we're not in a point where I know some of these people, or where we don't get to that, that's also fine. I've come to a point where, as I keep saying, I just need to have a life that's worth living, and in order to do that, I have to have healthy relationships in my life. And I welcome people on that journey, but if they're not interested, then neither am I. So I just want to stress that it's about me and my needs and my experiences, and So I would say that I can't remember a time without conflict. Oh, just content note that I'm going to be talking a lot of descriptions about the violence I experienced as a child. So just make sure you just take care of yourself as well. So I don't really remember a time without quite severe conflict. I can just remember it as soon as I kind of became alive. In fact, one of my first memories was being violently shaken, like repeatedly, and being screamed at and being told like over and over that everything is my fault. It's a bit weird. I mean, it's obviously not very good. But it's weird because there's this comedian who's talking about how your first memory is like spells out your life, and I'm like, oh yeah, that is my fault. You remember I talked about how everyone demonized me in my family, but also widely in my life, and it's a bit like when you're an underrepresented group, people do blame you for everything, and people do make it out to be everything's your fault, and yeah, so yeah, that was my introduction to life. Welcome to the world that is Earth. And yeah, so there was a lot of arguments and fighting, and so when we're talking about arguments, we're talking about like pretty intense, like hours and hours long, like shouting and screaming, and also sometimes including physical violence between the adults, one adult towards the other. And yeah, I think one of the things that I struggle with is how young I was when I was like first made to be like a counsellor, because we as kids we were kind of forced to counsel these people, and that's just really difficult to go through as a young person when obviously you're just a kid and you don't really know how to, you're not a therapist. Basically we were treated like little counsellors, and yeah, so that was really difficult, and we're talking like quite a lot of days, a lot of the time in the week, so multiple times a day in the week. There were different phases where it'd be worse or better depending on people's stress levels, depending on what was happening, and there was some times that got incredibly intense, and I think the police or social services would have been really necessary, but I just never knew about that stuff, you know. And we were in a different country, so I wouldn't know what the numbers were. Yeah, it's just very like, I just felt very isolated, and yeah, it's just really difficult. And one of the things that was also difficult was how, you know, great they were and the family was to the outside world. I think that was very difficult, was like, we're just very hidden, and we're very like, it was just so destructive at home, but that was like a secret. And I think that's one of the problems with these things, is that it is a secret. People are expected to shut up about these things. People are not expected to talk about it. Hence, there's not many videos on YouTube like this. But I think that's a part of the problem, and that's why I'm talking about it. You know, I think that illustrates why these things continue on, and why people keep doing these things. And so that's a part of me talking about it, is like the knowledge that keeping violence secret is a hugely problematic thing. And I have a right to talk about it. This is my life. This is my experiences. Like, I'm not out here, you know, that's one of the common themes about these things, is when someone talks about violence, people always privilege the most privileged people, who are often the people that are executing the violence. And they're like, well, what about them? Like, poor them, you're making them, you know, feel bad or seem bad and all this stuff. But it's like, what about me? Like, what about me? Like, you listening to what I'm saying, you know, I need to be able to have my experiences recognized. If you don't like it, you shouldn't behave like this, or you shouldn't like support people who behave like this. If you don't like hearing about these things, then people shouldn't behave like that. You see what I mean? My talking about it is me just talking about my experiences, and that's just what they are. So it's just my logic brain is just a bit like, people are so strange about these things. It's about me, you know, being real, and I can't be real unless I talk about what's real for me. Yeah, so content note, I mentioned suicidal ideation and stuff like that. So there was like a lot of threats of like people like killing themselves, which obviously is really difficult to handle, and the physical violence as well obviously was really difficult to witness. For me, I think the psychological stuff was really difficult, because the adults would kind of try to pit us against the other, and pit us against one side or the other, and that's been a big theme in my family, is like how, you know, one side tries to make the other side hate the other side, and it's just a bit like, look, you adults deal with your relationship, okay, that's your thing, and that's never been something in our family that's been separate. It's always been like kind of placed on us and forced on us that we have to deal with this and we have to sort out your relationship and we are responsible for that. And that's a real fucked up thing to do to your kids. You know, just sort it out and get divorced. You know, I don't believe that anyone should stay together when it's that toxic. No way. There's no way should anyone stay together when it's that bad. I'm not going to pretend it's simple, but there is spaces for like, maybe if something is that bad, some intense therapy and like restorative justice stuff and accountability and all this stuff, maybe something is possible. But I just think, you know, you need to stop and you need to think about what the impact is on everyone else. And one of the things that's really stayed with me is like feeling unsafe at home and just this strong sense of hypervigilance. And I just remember when the adults got home, there's always this absolute like fear, strong fear of all this stuff happening. And yeah, I think because the arguments would be so long and also so like often and so extreme, I think those are exhausting for a kid to go through. I remember making a diary of like when people would argue to try to figure out like when I would have to prepare for it. And I remember Sunday was a really, really busy day for arguments because people would be stressed about going to work, it seemed. And yeah, I'm just a bit like, look, if this is bad, something needs to happen. So I'm laughing because it's like not funny. I think, yeah, another thing, it was like we didn't actually seem very important to the adults. It seemed like we were always secondary or third or fourth to their priorities. Like we were tools rather than people, and that was really difficult for me. I remember it was when my family split up that one of my adults seemed to like see me for the first time and see me as a person. And there was like a lot of neglect there, you know, neglect of our needs in many ways, including like emotional needs. And you know, like I was very, very rarely hugged, for example. it's so like violin. And but now it's like you can really see that manifest because I'm always like, hug me to my partner. So much so that it's probably quite annoying. He doesn't seem to mind, but yeah. I'm like a little fiend for hugs. That is actually a common thing. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like you're never sufficed through the hugs. Is that the right words? Yeah. There's like some arguments where I kind of feared for everyone's safety and for like people's individual safety. I guess there was a lot of chucking of stuff, like chucking of glasses and vases and lamps and stuff like that, like a lot of smashing of stuff. And yeah, and then my own behavior became quite out of control as a young person, as an autistic person. Like I would also get like pretty fucking angry, and that's like, I'm not excusing it, it's not okay, but it's also fairly understandable. So those are when I had the worst meltdowns ever in my life. My meltdowns are much more like controlled now and manageable now. It's just really shit, really. But this was like ongoing for like ever until I was 19, so that's a pretty long time. And I think it kind of almost emphasizes, you know, that's a lot to unpack and that's a lot to recover from. So I don't think we should ever take that lightly, how much support people deserve after that kind of experience. And it makes me worry people that aren't prepared to like, and you know, it's fine, well, it's up to them, but it makes me worry if people have gone through that and then they've just gone out into the world, you know, it's a bit like, And I think sometimes it's manifested in some people having quite extreme, like oppressive views now who were a part of this group, you know, like very sexist views and stuff like that. That shouldn't be looked at in my view. I don't think that should be continued on and encouraged forever. I just think it's really important that when we've had shit happen to us, we have to deal with it somehow. And yeah, I think that's all I'm going to talk about so far at the moment. There's a lot more that happened, but I don't really want to go too much into like the details of all the arguments and especially the extreme ones. But just because it's like, I don't know how effective that would be for the viewer, but I think you get the impression from what I'm saying. So I hope this has been interesting and insightful, and I mean, there might be more positives and more things to celebrate, but I think those are the kind of cornerstones, and those, I don't think we can underestimate how much of a positive impact me having those approaches, you know, having my interest in emotional well-being, I think those things are huge parts of my life that have been really effective. But I just wanted to change this narrative that it's only, you know, I'm like a sad story and that's kind of it, or I'm like, you know, oh, poor Nadia and that's kind of it. It's a bit like, not really, like, it's something to celebrate, being able to come out the other side of those experiences and use them to make sure that you are a better person and that you are someone that you are proud of and you're someone that you can love, and that, you know, getting to that place where I love myself is like, it's such an important journey for me that I think a lot of people might be able to relate to and with. This is obviously incredibly complex, and I imagine that I have kind of expressed that to you because I think the way I communicate is like about lots of different things and helps to try to encapsulate that complexity, but I hope it's in a way that is like digestible and that you can understand. I hope I'm communicating effectively is what I'm trying to say, especially about how nuanced this is, but also it's just not a simple thing. It's a bit like, you know how disability is always framed as negative, you know, having a difficult upbringing is always framed as negative, and I'm not here to romanticize those experiences. I'm here to say that yes, it is really difficult, and I would never wish like the painful parts of life on anyone, but suffering is a part of life. It is a part of that journey, and it means that I connect with other people because of that. You know, a lot of marginalised people understand that because they have whole communities based on that pain and suffering, which obviously is not like, I'm not saying that's great, but it's a part of life and it's a part of like the better parts of life as well. And I find that I have a lot of insights and valuable things to bring to the world because of my experiences, and I think that's the same for so many other people. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so my camera's dying, so thank you very much. I hope you've learned a lot, and you can see there are difficulties from these experiences, but there's also a lot of positives and like things that we learn from them that can contribute to our lives. So thanks for watching. Bye!